They called it Conference Room C, but everyone knew its real name, the Room of Endings. At 8:30 a.m., the sun came in low and hard through the glass, a white Denver blade across the table that made people squint when they were about to lose their jobs. I'd worn the charcoal blazer, the one that turned my shoulders into a statement and my pulse into a secret. There's a strange etiquette to corporate executions. You show up pressed and punctual, as if neat seams could bargain with fate. Brad was already seated at the head, a monarch borrowed from a pitch deck, all immaculate hair, and that new CEO gloss you get from never building things with your hands. To his left, Karen from HR hugged a manila folder like it might struggle. To his right, a woman I didn't recognize. Legal is often a stranger until they aren't. The chairs were arranged to keep me facing the windows, so the light was in my eyes, and theirs was in shadow. Theater. I sat, placed my phone face down, and folded my hands. They didn't tremble. They hadn't for weeks. "Evelyn, please sit," Brad said, making a ceremony of what was already decided. He used the tone execs reserve for difficult pets and IPOs. "We need to discuss concerning patterns in your recent work." He intoned the charges with the measured cadence of someone practicing for a mirror. Unauthorized access, scope drift, proprietary data on personal devices. Each word landed like a chess move I'd diagrammed months ago. I let my eyes widen, shocked, wounded, exactly the performance their scene required. "The Cerebralink project is no longer your concern, effective immediately." The folder slid toward me on a whisper of paper and carpet. "Security will escort you out. Your badge has been deactivated." There it was, the word that mattered, deactivated. Somewhere beyond this table, an identity field changed state. A credential winked from true to false, and a small, vigilant script far from the building woke up and stretched. I looked down at my watch. 8:37 a.m., 4 minutes early. They always rush the endings. "This is a mistake," I said softly, and it wasn't a lie, just not the mistake they imagined. The legal woman finally spoke, the Mont Blanc pen steady in her fingers. "Any attempt to access company systems or contact clients will result in immediate legal action." Through the glass, Marcus and Terry, good men who hated this part, appeared at the door. They had families and mortgages and perfect posture. I would miss our coffee banter more than I expected. "Can I at least know why?" I asked Brad, offering him a last chance to be a person. He tried on sympathy and wore it badly. "The board feels new leadership is needed for Cerebralink. Tyler has shown remarkable initiative improving your original designs." Tyler, who couldn't tell a recursive function from a cul-de-sac until I spent 60 hours drawing him maps. Tyler, now a visionary in polished shoes. I signed the receipt of my own exit as if it were a delivery for someone else, and stood when Marcus touched my elbow. Past the glass, the floor was already busy with mornings. You'd be amazed how normal the world looks when it's removing you from it. I walked between rows of people who would keep building the future, not realizing how much of it was stapled to my name. At my desk, I gathered a succulent that had pretended to thrive under fluorescent lights, a photo of my sister's kids with milk mustache grins, and the "World's Okayest Engineer" mug someone thought was funny. I left the laptop, the hoodies, the acrylic award that caught light and dust in equal measure. 8:43 a.m. The air tasted like tin and new carpet. Elevators make endings polite. We stood inside that humming rectangle while the building slid past, and I listened to the machinery, thinking about other systems that would move just as invisibly. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," Marcus said. "You were always decent to us." "It's just business," I said, and meant it in the most structural way. There are rules to every game. I'd read mine twice. We stepped into the lobby. Glass, stone, the faint echo of footsteps that never fully die in buildings like this. I held my badge to the turnstile one last time. The reader gave a soft, negative chirp that most people hear as humiliation. To me, it sounded like a baton slap. Your leg, your lane, go. When Marcus keyed my exit, my phone, face down, buzzed once. No flourish, just a blunt confirmation. A green check somewhere inside the quiet. 8:47 a.m. Outside, Denver was crisp the way mountain cities are, as if the air is rinsed between dawn and work. Across the street, the cafe windows held the day like a lens. The barista recognized me and prepped the cortado without asking. Ritual is a technology, too. I took the corner table that looks back at Veltrix's stacked glass, a mirrored hive. Tiny figures already moving faster than they had 5 minutes ago. When you pull a single hidden rivet from a skyscraper, there isn't a crash. There's a groan behind the walls, a redistribution of weight no one understands until the elevator stops between floors. I opened my laptop. The screen sprang to life with the calm of a judge. A secure inbox bloomed with subject lines that had been precisely timed. USPTO confirmations, sequence counters, immutable timestamps, each a fingerprint pressed in public clay. A second inbox, curated with ridiculous care, began to populate with replies I hadn't yet sent. Engineers who used to be here and weren't anymore. Journalists who asked careful questions about attribution last year. Investors who liked the odds, but not the mess. I didn't read them. Not yet. You don't stare into a solar eclipse while the shadow is still crossing. I closed my eyes and let the morning pass through me. Screws tightening on the other side of the street. Somewhere above the lobby, a CI pipeline would try its first build of the day and find a polite, impassable sign. License verification failed. Please contact the owner. The live systems would keep humming. They were never my hostage. But any attempt to change them would be like asking a locked engine to service itself. People would gather in glass rooms. Words like urgent and immediate would populate subject lines. Someone would try to page me. Someone would find my photo missing from the org chart and feel a small shock of recognition they'd call surprise. If you want to understand how empires are made and unmade, you start with permission. Who has the right to enter a door? Who can change a line of code? Who signs a page? And what does that signature confess? Months ago, on page 164 of a document dull enough to dissolve attention, a single paragraph established that the heart of their machine was on loan. Today, at 8:47, the loan matured. I looked back through the glass at the building where I'd lived other versions of the same morning. My reflection doubled over the hive. Two Evelyns for a second. The one who believed that meritocracy could float and the one who learned to count, to save receipts, to write her name where it could not be erased. The cortado arrived, and the barista set it down with the reverence reserved for regulars and saints. "Rough day?" she asked. "Necessary," I said. Across the street, a figure who moved like a problem solver sprinted toward an elevator and found a line as long as a confession. In my peripheral vision, my phone pulsed again. A second green check, a friend from the distant past confirming what the first had already assured. I let it fade. There is no satisfaction in gloating when the math is doing it for you. "Do you want anything sweet?" the barista asked, and I thought about the last 5 months and how sweetness and justice are different flavors entirely. "Maybe later," I said. She nodded the way people do when they sense ceremony and give it room. There are many ways to end a story. Some are loud, some are tragic, some are just a door that won't open anymore, and the quiet of a person not trying the handle. Twice. I lifted the cup, watched the crema hold its fragile map for a moment before it broke and reformed, and I tasted the morning on the other side of endings. Out there in the hive, meetings bloomed, alarms stacked into chorus, and someone said my name with a weight it hadn't carried yesterday. In here, a single paragraph on page 164 continued being true. I checked the time. 8:53. 17 minutes until a CEO discovered the cost of reading by summary. 23 until legal understood their own signature. An hour until a board meeting became a salvage operation for a narrative they thought they wrote. After that, a walk. The park is good when cities panic. Trees don't know the word liability. Necessary, I repeated to the empty chair across from me, as if the old me were sitting there in a too-big hoodie, asking for proof. The proof would arrive. In time-stamped emails. In systems that insisted on permission. In a story whose authorship could not be reassigned by slide deck. Outside, the glass flashed onwards with a sunbeam and then settled back into being a mirror. I lifted my cup again and smiled at the woman in the window who had stayed calm while a room remembered how to end things politely. Funny, I thought, how we dress for our own executions, and for the first day of our company, exactly the same way. The erasure didn't come as a thunderclap. It came as a slow weathering, like stone faces worn down in a forgotten square. 6 months before that Tuesday morning, my name began vanishing from commit logs. Not all at once, just enough to make me doubt whether I'd remembered correctly. A missing attribution here, a line edited to credit team effort there. By the time I caught Tyler's name attached to a core function I'd written alone in the dark, my fingerprints had been wiped from half the codebase. At first, I told myself the lie that every engineer tells. The work matters more than the credit. And for a while, I believed it. But in Silicon Valley, credit is currency, and when you stop counting, someone else starts spending it for you. Brad had arrived like a herald of efficiency, quoting MBA scripture about leveraging human capital and scalable innovation. I should have recognized the signs then. The old CEO who believed in craft was gone, and the new one valued optics over origin. Tyler, my summer intern who once thought recursion was a Greek island, suddenly became the face of innovation. He polished slides with words like visionary and architect, while I refined algorithms no one else could even read. At investor briefings, he stood at the front, explaining breakthroughs with my diagrams, my napkin sketches, my nights spent bleeding light from a laptop screen into empty rooms. I kept working, though. At 2 in the morning, with instant ramen going cold and the buzz of my neighbor's TV as background music, I solved problems that had stumped entire teams. My MacBook, bought with my own credit card before Veltrix ever signed me, became both womb and witness. I logged every session, saved every iteration, and, out of old grad school paranoia, recorded screen captures of myself coding. My apartment electricity bills spiked, each surge a neon timestamp proving that CerebralLink's skeleton had been built in a one-bedroom walk-up, not a glass tower. The contract they forgot to update was my lifeline. When Veltrix promoted me from contractor to full-time, someone in legal had been careless. The original clause still stood, all intellectual property developed using company resources during assigned hours belonged to Veltrix, a simple phrase, a deadly oversight. Because 60% of CerebralLink's architecture was born outside those walls, at hours when the office was dark. My receipts didn't just prove I worked. They proved it was mine. Still, foresight is useless without strategy. That's where Laura Beck came in. I met her at a Women in Tech panel, of all places. I'd expected polite networking and recycled advice. Instead, I found a lawyer with the eyes of a predator. Over coffee that lasted 4 hours, I handed her the skeleton key. Screenshots, timestamps, draft patents I'd written but never filed. She didn't flinch. "They're running the classic playbook," she said, scrolling with a fingertip as sharp as a scalpel. "Dilute your presence, elevate a puppet, then eliminate the threat. But they made one mistake." She tapped the clause. This. It wasn't just a loophole. It was daylight in their fortress wall. And worse for them, every attempt to erase me was its own confession. Commit histories don't lie. Draft patents with names shifted like shell games are still admissible evidence of intent. Each change, each demotion of my role was proof not of my absence, but of their fraud. From that day, the fog of resignation burned off. I started keeping 2 sets of books, the public version, where I continued to smile in meetings and submit my diagrams like a dutiful engineer, and the private archive, where I documented each revision, each erasure, each insult, dressed as oversight. Every day was a rehearsal for the lawsuit they didn't know they were writing for me. My sister thought I was spiraling. Over drinks one night, she told me, "Companies restructure all the time. You're not a victim." She didn't understand. It wasn't paranoia if the pattern was visible in black and white. I wasn't the paranoid one. I was the archivist. Veltrix wanted a clean narrative for investors. I wanted the truth laminated in signatures and sealed by timestamps. And when Brad pushed Tyler forward as the face of Cerebralink, I stopped fighting in daylight. I went nocturnal, folding evidence into places they wouldn't look. The night I realized what I had was both terrifying and exhilarating. Imagine finding a deed in a drawer you hadn't opened for years and realizing the skyscraper outside your window stands on land you own. That was the contractor clause. That was my name in the code. That was the mountain they'd built their castle on, without realizing the rock had never been theirs. From that point on, every coffee with Laura was war planning. Incorporation papers drafted, provisional patents filed. A company born in silence. Archiva Systems, named for the lever Archimedes promised could move the world. The world in this case was Veltrix. They thought they were erasing me. They were chiseling their own epitaph, letter by letter. The art of hiding a revolution inside paperwork is older than empires. Monarchs lost thrones to clauses they never read. Generals signed treaties that conceded more than a battlefield ever could. I learned that history the way all engineers do, by accident, buried in the margins of manuals no one wanted to read. And when Veltrix decided my name didn't belong on the future I'd built, I turned that history into a weapon disguised as a routine form. It began with a blank template, Cerebralink V3, technical specification. 200 pages of compliance matrices, server diagrams, deployment protocols, necessary for government contracts but designed to be unreadable. A reader's eyes glaze after 5 pages. After 50, they're begging for escape. At 200, they'll sign anything to make the words stop. That was the camouflage. The trick wasn't writing lies. It was writing truths no one cared to understand. Database schemas stretched across 6 pages, annotated with footnotes so dense they looked like insect trails. Network topologies drawn in such intricate loops they might have been modern art. I wove flowcharts that could double as Rorschach tests, every page legitimate, every section required. And in the middle of it all, page 164, section 6.4, subsection D, paragraph 3. The one line that mattered, written in language so technical and flat, it was invisible. Core Algorithmic Foundations, developed by Evelyn Rohr between January-April 2021 on personal equipment, remain the intellectual property of the developer. Licensed to Veltrix Dynamics, under terms to be renegotiated upon version 3. Full release, no flourish, no italics, just one rivet buried deep in steel. I scheduled the signing for a Friday at 4:30 p.m. The timing mattered. Brad's mind would already be on cocktails with investors, not compliance. Legal would be looking at watches, not clauses. Tired executives sign faster, and tired men rarely suspect traps dressed as routine. The conference room smelled faintly of stale coffee and whiteboard markers. Tyler was there first, thumbs flicking over his phone, already rehearsing his weekend. "Big document," he muttered without looking up. "All necessary DoD contracts," I replied. "You know how it is." He didn't. But he nodded anyway, satisfied with the illusion of competence. Brad swept in 2 minutes late, still carrying the pulse of his last investor call. Behind him came Margaret, the CFO. Jason, head of legal, and Samuel, VP of engineering, who once fought for me but now looked away too easily. They took their seats, exhaling the exhaustion of people who thought the world bent around them. "Let's make this quick," Brad said, already uncapping a pen. "Evelyn's prepared the spec for V3. Tyler, give us the highlights." Tyler launched into a shallow speech about UI refinements and enhanced user experiences. And he talked about colors, not algorithms, shapes, not systems. The surface glitter of work he barely understood. They applauded politely. Then Brad turned to me. "And this captures everything?" "Everything," I said. "Requirements, compliance, licensing considerations." I slid the documents across the table, watching their hands take them. Margaret signed without hesitation. Jason skimmed like a man paid by the minute, and Samuel initialed each page with weary resignation. Then Brad. He signed with flourish, his pen scratching authority into paper he didn't care to read. Jason looked up once halfway through. "Pre-employment work?" he asked, brow furrowed faintly. "The algorithms I developed before joining full-time," I explained smoothly. "We've been using them under an implied license. This just documents it formally for compliance." "Smart," he said, nodding as if I'd done him a favor. "Always good to paper the trail," I smiled, though not for him, because that phrase, paper the trail, would one day be worth millions. When the meeting ended, they filed out quickly, coats already on shoulders. I lingered, gathering every page, every signature, every mark of careless approval. In my bag, I carried 6 confessions disguised as technical specifications. That night, my apartment became an archive. I scanned each page at the highest resolution, saving them to 3 cloud drives, 2 encrypted hard disks, and a blockchain timestamping service. I emailed copies to Laura, who laughed when she saw them. "It's beautiful," she said. "Camouflage in plain sight. They signed your ownership without even knowing it." "Not camouflage," I corrected her. "Documentation." Outside my window, Denver was lit like a circuit board, each office window a pixel in someone else's dream. But I knew that in one of those towers, men were congratulating themselves for signing off on a future they no longer owned. And somewhere between page 163 and 165, my name had been welded into the machine with ink that would not fade. The sunset poured gold through my blinds, striking the diagram still drying on my desk. For a moment, the lines and loops looked like veins lit from within, alive with the glow of inevitability. I thought about how empires collapse, not in battle, but in paperwork. One misplaced signature, one unread clause, one engineer who refuses to be erased. In Silicon Valley, sabotage is easy. A hidden back door, a corrupted repository, a single keystroke that sends systems crashing into silence. But sabotage is loud, and loud crimes are punished. What I built was quiet, legal, almost polite. Archiva Systems, LLC, a company no bigger than a line in Delaware's registry, incorporated months before anyone at Veltrix thought to notice. I gave it a name like a lever. Archiva from Archimedes. Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world. It existed to hold my patents, my timestamps, the legal scaffolding of everything I had created when Veltrix was just a pitch deck and a hope. The fail-safe wasn't code that destroyed. It was code that reminded. A simple script on my AWS account, checking every 60 seconds if my Veltrix credentials still existed. The moment they blinked out, it would begin, not with chaos, but with a cascade of perfectly ordinary, perfectly devastating paperwork, first wave, patent and applications. 47 of them, preloaded and waiting, each one an affidavit to those sleepless nights on my MacBook. Algorithms for neural pattern mapping, adaptive response matrices, signal interpretation, all stamped with timestamps, video logs, and my name in ink no board could erase. With a single pulse, the USPTO servers would receive them, assigning priority dates Veltrix could never undo. Second wave, notification emails. Not to Veltrix employees, never that, I wasn't reckless, but to alumni who'd left for competitors, to investors who'd backed me personally before Veltrix existed, to journalists who'd once asked why my name had been missing from the decks. Each email pre-written, each with attachments they couldn't ignore. I wasn't telling them what Veltrix had done. I was showing them. Third wave, Archiva's public reveal. A landing page timed to go live at the exact second my badge died. Clean design, understated. A portfolio of algorithms available for license, with pricing tiers simple enough to make a CFO wince. Startups got a friendly rate. Enterprise clients, like Veltrix, faced a premium, 25% of gross revenue. Fair, brutal, non-negotiable. But the masterpiece lived inside Veltrix's own systems. For 3 years I had architected Cerebralink, stitching together components like a tailor threading seams. I knew where every dependency lived, where every fragile integration clung to my algorithms. And I had marked them subtly, quietly, as licensed. Not in hidden sabotage, but in the documentation Brad himself had signed. So when my credentials vanished, the systems didn't break. They froze. Builds failed with a polite error message. License verification failed. Please contact Archiva Systems, LLC for renewal. Production kept humming. I wasn't a monster, but no updates could deploy. No demos could refresh. No defense contract could move forward without my key. From across the street in the cafe, I could imagine it unfolding like a silent film. At 8:48, a DevOps engineer frowning at a red build. At 8:49, a Slack channel buzzing. At 8:50, Samuel Torres realizing this wasn't a bug. And by 8:53, Brad's phone lighting up with the first investor asking why the DoD deployment was failing. I sipped my cortado. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Inside the glass tower, panic was blooming like fire through dry grass. The ethics of it were simple. I hadn't stolen data. I hadn't touched their production servers. I hadn't sabotaged a thing. I'd simply withdrawn permission for them to use what was mine. The car still ran. They just couldn't service the engine anymore. If they wanted to keep driving, they'd need to acknowledge who built the motor and pay for the keys. Across from me, the barista polished a glass, unaware that just beyond the street, millions of dollars were dissolving by the second. My phone buzzed. Confirmation from the USPTO, followed by another from my lawyer, then the third from the blockchain timestamp service. Each one a green seal of inevitability. At 8:57, I imagined Jason Wright in legal pulling up the V3 technical spec, flipping through pages with sweat on his collar and stopping cold on page 164, realizing the sentence he had skimmed past was now a wall, a sentence he had signed, a sentence Veltrix could not erase. I let the emails flood in. Investors eager, journalists hungry, former colleagues whispering finally. None of it surprised me. Systems behave the way they're designed, and this one had been designed months ago with inevitability written into its bones. I wasn't watching Veltrix collapse. I was watching equilibrium return. For every hour they had erased me, I now reclaimed tenfold. For every credit stolen, I had a signature that proved the theft. They thought termination was an ending, but in that moment, sipping coffee under the Denver sun, I knew it was only the beginning. By 9:15 a.m., my inbox had turned into a bonfire. 17 unread messages, then 32, then 70, each stamped with urgency. Angel investors, journalists, former colleagues now scattered across the valley. The emails were brief, clipped in the way people write when they smell opportunity. When can we talk? Are you available today? Please confirm you own the IP. I didn't answer. Not yet. Timing mattered. At 9:20, my phone vibrated with Brad's name. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:22, another call. At 9:25, a text. Evelyn, this is a misunderstanding. We need to talk. By 9:30, he appeared in the cafe doorway himself, shedding CO polish like a snake whose skin had cracked overnight. His tie was still perfect, but the edges of his face looked older than they had an hour before. Evelyn, he said, sliding into the seat across from me without asking, what have you done? I took a slow sip of cortado, savoring the symmetry. Filed some patents, started a company, updated my LinkedIn. You know, the usual post-termination activities. This is corporate sabotage. His voice trembled at the edges like glass under pressure. Is it? I haven't touched Veltrix systems. I simply ended a license for technology I developed before I ever worked here. Page 164, Brad. Section 6.4, subsection D. Your signature sits right below it. His eyes narrowed. You tricked us. No, I documented the truth. You signed it. If you didn't read it, that's not my problem. His phone buzzed violently on the table, and I saw the name that made his jaw tighten. One of the Series C investors. The timing was exquisite. I slid a printed page across to him. Archiva Systems Consulting Rates. In case you need help understanding the technology you've been running on. Friends and family, discount. He didn't touch it. Instead, he stood abruptly and walked outside to take the call, his gestures sharp and frantic through the glass. I watched him pace, a king suddenly aware his crown was papier-mâché. At 9:50, Sarah Kim from TechCrunch published the first article. Veltrix CTO launches competing firm, claims ownership of core technology. By 10 on, my inbox had 63 new messages, including acquisition offers, licensing inquiries, and one desperate subject line from Tyler, please help. I archived it without opening. The real duel began at 4:30 p.m. in the modest office space I had rented months earlier under Archiva's name. Nothing grand, just a glass-walled room with a view of the mountains, but it was mine. When Brad arrived with Jason Wright and Samuel Torres, they looked as though they had aged years since morning. Jason started first, voice carefully neutral. We've reviewed the documentation. The May 10th signature appears to be binding. Appears to be? I asked, smiling. Jason, those were your words. Smart to paper the trail. The trail leads right here. Samuel finally met my eyes. The entire codebase is compromised. Every critical system relies on your algorithms. Not compromised, I corrected, unlicensed, important distinction. Brad leaned forward, abandoning pretense. What happens if we refuse your terms? I opened a folder, sliding the licensing agreement across the desk. Then you rebuild from scratch, without my algorithms, without 3 years of optimization. Should only take Tyler. What, 5 years? Jason scanned the terms. 25% of gross revenue, no cap. His face betrayed nothing, but I saw his knuckles whiten around the pages. That's extortion, Brad hissed. It's valuation, I replied evenly. Those algorithms are worth more than your entire company, but feel free to prove me wrong. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. The team is panicking. Half of them want to quit. They're welcome to apply here, I said. Archiva will need good engineers, especially ones who actually understand the technology. Brad's face darkened. You're poaching our people. I'm offering jobs. If they prefer to stay and rebuild everything from scratch, that's their choice. Silence filled the room. Outside, the mountains glowed in the late sunlight, the same peaks I had stared at while sketching Cerebralink's first architecture years ago. Finally, Brad asked the only question that mattered. If we agree to your terms, can you guarantee the technology will work? It's been working for 3 years, I said. The only thing that's changed is who you're paying for it. Jason exhaled slowly. We need board approval. Can you give us 24 hours? You have until market open tomorrow, I said. After that, I'll be busy taking other offers. Microsoft, Google, they've already called. They stood, defeated but still clinging to formality. At the door, Samuel turned back. His voice was low, almost contrite. For what it's worth, Evelyn, I'm sorry. I should have defended you. You should have, I said, but you didn't. And here we are. When they left, I sat alone, watching the sunset blaze over the city. My phone buzzed with messages. Investors, journalists, engineers, all demanding a piece of the story. But I knew the truth already. This wasn't sabotage. It wasn't even revenge. It was leverage. And leverage is all history ever remembers. The next morning, I was back at the cafe with a cortado in hand, same table by the window. To anyone watching, it looked like routine. To me, it felt like coronation. Across the street, Veltrix's building throbbed with unnatural energy. Lights on all night, figures pacing in glass rooms, black town cars pulling up like a funeral procession. The board had been summoned at 8:47 a.m. 1 year to the minute after my badge had beeped its last red refusal, my phone buzzed with a single message from Brad. We accept your terms. Legal will send documents within the hour. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed Archiva's numbers. In 12 hours, the company had secured tentative partnerships worth $30 million. The patents were confirmed, time-stamped, fast-tracked. Microsoft and Google were already circling, each one offering licensing terms Veltrix could never match. I let the inbox swell, watching opportunity breed like fire on dry prairie grass. By 9:30, the official licensing agreement arrived, 25% of gross revenue, retroactive to the date of my termination. Formal recognition that Archiva Systems was the originator of CerebralInk's core technology. Mandatory attribution in all future patents, presentations, and documentation. There was a non-disparagement clause hidden in the middle. Laura caught it immediately. Remove it, she said flatly. They don't get to silence you after trying to erase you. They caved. At 11 a.m., the final version arrived, stripped clean of their last attempt at control. I signed it with the same pen I'd used to incorporate Archiva. With one stroke, Veltrix's systems unfroze, engineers could deploy again, and the DoD demo would be salvaged. But nothing inside that tower would ever be the same. By noon, TechCrunch had already run the follow-up headline. David beats Goliath. One engineer reclaims an innovation empire. Comment sections buzzed. LinkedIn lit up with praise and outrage in equal measure. In the valley, stories spread like wildfire, and this one had the perfect arc. A builder erased, a clause forgotten, an empire humbled by its own arrogance. At 2:00 p.m., and I held Archiva's first all-hands meeting in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the Rockies. 5 engineers sat with me. 2 from my original team who had quit Veltrix that morning, and 3 others who walked out when the licensing terms hit their inboxes. They looked both terrified and exhilarated. We're not here to destroy Veltrix, I told them. We're here to build something better. A company where attribution isn't negotiable, where the people who create the future own it. Yeah, their eyes lit with something I hadn't seen in months. Belief. The roadmap was ambitious. Neural interfaces for patients who had lost speech, adaptive AI that could translate intent into communication, technologies that belonged in science fiction until now. CerebralInk had been my past. Archiva would be the future. That evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Tyler's voice was small, cracked. Evelyn, I just wanted to apologize. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry. They told me I deserved the credit. I believed them." "Yes," I said, "you did." "Is there any chance?" "No, Tyler, there's no chance. You signed your name to work you didn't understand. You let them erase me. Now you live with it." I hung up before his silence could become a plea. By sunset, I was back at the cafe. The barista placed a cortado on the table with a smile, on the house, for the woman who beat the system. I raised it in a quiet toast. To the engineers erased from their own work, to the creators told their ideas were worth less than the presentations that sold them, to every name crossed out of a history they had written. Through the glass, Veltrix's offices glowed with evening exhaustion. Somewhere inside, Brad was explaining to investors why he had signed away 25% of revenue without reading the fine print. Jason was drafting memos about new documentation review processes. Tyler was learning that borrowed credit is a short-lived currency. Me? I had a company to build, a future to create, and for the first time in years, a story with my name firmly written at the center. They tried to erase me. Instead, I became the author.